At 7:23 in the morning on June 18th, 1944, Feldwebel Karl Zimmermann stood in a third-floor window of a half-destroyed farmhouse outside Carentan, France. Through his Car 98K scope, he watched an American machine gun nest 200 yards away. The MG-42 had killed 6 of his men in the last hour. In the next 40 seconds, he would be dead. Not from that machine gun, from a place he never thought to look. 3 miles west, Technical Sergeant Daniel Sullivan sat motionless inside a grain silo. Not near it, inside it. He had been there for 11 hours. No food, no water, a bucket for waste. His Springfield M1903A4 rested on sandbags he had dragged up a rusted ladder in darkness. Through a hole he had cut with tin snips, he could see the entire German defensive line. 37 positions, 14 officers identified by insignia and behavior. In the last 6 days, he had killed 23 of them. The Germans knew someone was hunting their leadership. They had sent patrols, searched buildings, questioned civilians. They never looked up at the silos. Farm equipment was not tactical terrain. That assumption would cost them the Cotentin Peninsula. Within 6 weeks, this technique would spread to 60 American snipers across France. Conservative estimates would credit it with saving 200 American lives. The technique reduced German command effectiveness by 40% in sectors where it was employed. The Army would adopt the innovation in 1946, with zero attribution. A single paragraph on page 43 of a training manual. No mention of the Wisconsin dairy farmer who invented it. Daniel Sullivan would die forgotten in 1998, age 79. A headstone that said nothing about the war, nothing about the 28 officers he killed. Nothing about the 200 men who went home because he understood silos better than West Point understood tactics. Some heroes die loud. Daniel Sullivan died the quietest of all. This is not a story about recognition. This is a story about a promise. A promise made in a foxhole on the night of June 12th, 1944. A promise to a woman named Sarah, a woman Danny would never meet. A promise that would drive him to climb into a concrete cylinder 3 miles from enemy lines and stay there for 11 hours without moving. A promise that would save 200 lives. 3 men would die before Danny understood the solution. A German captain would discover the technique and realize his fortifications had become death traps. An Army major would try to suppress the innovation as farmer nonsense. And 60 years later, a Milwaukee woman would travel to Wisconsin every Memorial Day to place a flag on the grave of a man she never met. This is that story. But to understand how a dairy farmer changed sniper warfare, we need to go back to Sheboygan County, Wisconsin, to a boy who learned to climb into dark silos before he learned to drive, to a kid who could hit a groundhog at 200 yards when he was 13. If you or your father or grandfather served in World War II, you know what it meant when necessity forced innovation, when the old ways failed and new ways emerged from unexpected places. When farm boys who never graduated high school taught West Point officers how to win. Many of you watching grew up on farms. You know what it meant to climb into a silo with a sledgehammer, to spend hours alone in the dark breaking up clogged grain. You know that fear, that claustrophobia, that particular kind of farm work that nobody else wanted to do. That knowledge would save American lives in Normandy. Share your farm stories in the comments. Tell us about the hard jobs you did, the skills you learned. Hit that subscribe button. Because there is more to this story than the Army ever documented. Much more. Daniel Sullivan grew up in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin. His father owned 80 acres of dairy land, bought it in 1922 with money saved from 10 years of factory work, built it into a working operation through depression and drought and every hardship rural Wisconsin could deliver. Danny was born in 1919, second of 5 sons, which meant he did the work nobody else wanted. Mucking stalls at 4 in the morning, repairing fence line in January cold that froze your fingers through gloves, and climbing into silos to break up clogged grain. That last job was the one everyone hated. Silos were 40 feet tall, concrete cylinders filled with fermenting corn and hay. When the silage compacted wrong, someone had to climb up, drop inside through a narrow hatch, spend hours in darkness with a sledgehammer breaking up blockages. It was claustrophobic, dangerous. The kind of work that could kill you if the grain shifted wrong, if you slipped, if the fumes overcame you. Danny did it without complaint. By age 12, he had spent more hours inside silos than most men spend in a lifetime. He knew every sound, every smell, every danger. He learned to move carefully, to position himself precisely, to work in darkness with nothing but feel and instinct. He learned patience, the kind that came from spending 6 hours alone in a concrete tube breaking up silage while your brothers did easier work outside. He also learned to shoot. His uncle owned a farm 15 miles east, had problems with groundhogs, pests that dug holes cattle could step in, break legs, ruin pasture. The uncle paid a nickel per tail. Danny was 13 when he shot his first groundhog at 200 yards. His uncle made him walk the distance. Pace it off, prove it. The man could not believe a 13-year-old kid had made that shot. But there was the groundhog, dead, 200 yards from where Danny had been standing. By 15, Danny was the best shot in the county. Won the state youth shooting competition in 1937. Brought home a trophy his mother displayed on the mantle. Polished it every week, showed it to visitors. His father was less impressed. Said shooting was fine, but cows needed milking. The world outside Sheboygan County seemed far away. Europe and Asia were places you read about in newspapers, problems that belonged to other people. The Sullivans had their own problems, keeping the farm running, keeping food on the table, surviving another year. Then Pearl Harbor happened, December 7th, 1941. Danny was 22 years old, exempt from service, essential agricultural worker. His father needed him. The farm could not run without him. But 3 of Danny's cousins enlisted in the first month. One came home in a flag-draped coffin by spring 1942, killed at some place in the Pacific nobody in Sheboygan County had ever heard of. Danny could not shake the guilt, could not shake the feeling that while other men fought, he was safe, milking cows, breaking up silage, living a life that felt small while the world burned. In October 1942, he walked into the recruiting office in Sheboygan. The recruiter looked at his papers, saw essential agricultural worker, asked if he was sure. Danny was sure. His father did not speak to him for 2 weeks, not in anger, in grief. He had already lost one nephew. Could not bear the thought of losing a son. But he also understood duty, understood that some things mattered more than keeping a farm running. They shook hands the day Danny left for Camp McCoy. Did not hug, just shook hands. His father's grip was strong, calloused from 40 years of farm work. The same hands that had taught Danny to milk cows, to repair machinery, to survive Wisconsin winters. Basic training at Camp McCoy was easy. Danny already knew hard work, already knew cold, already knew how to function on 4 hours of sleep and bad food. The drill sergeants could not break what farm life had already hardened. The rifle range was where instructors noticed him. Every target, center mass. Every distance, 200 yards, 400 yards, 600 yards. Danny did not miss, did not need coaching. Just understood trajectory and wind and how to control his breathing. Instructors asked where he had learned. He said groundhogs. They did not understand. City boys never did. But farm boys knew that shooting at 200 yards across pasture in Wisconsin wind taught you more than any range instructor ever could. They sent him to sniper school at Fort Benning. Graduated second in his class. First was a competitive shooter from Colorado. Professional. Trained since childhood. Danny did not care about rankings. He cared about effective range and wind compensation and getting the job done. By April 1944, Danny was in England with the 82nd Airborne Division. Designated marksman assigned to headquarters company. Most snipers worked in pairs. Danny preferred alone. He had spent too much time in silos to need conversation. The problem started on D-Day +7, June 13, 1944. The 82nd was pushing toward Carentan. German resistance was coordinated, professional, lethal, machine gun nests supported by mortar teams, supported by sniper overwatch. The Americans advanced. The Germans killed them, not randomly, systematically. Radio men first, officers second, anyone giving orders third. It was execution by sniper fire from positions nobody could see. German snipers were shooting from church steeples, barn lofts, water towers, every elevated position in Norman Balkage country. They had clear fields of fire, perfect concealment, and Americans were dying trying to counter them with ground-level tactics that did not work. By June 14th, the 82nd had lost 11 men to sniper fire. Not artillery, not machine guns, precision rifle fire from invisible shooters. American doctrine said suppress with artillery and advance with infantry. But artillery was needed elsewhere. Tanks could not elevate guns high enough. Infantry could not see the targets. The Germans were not just better positioned. They were using terrain correctly. Elevation, concealment, multiple hides, shoot and move. Basic sniper craft that worked because Americans were trying to fight from the ground against an enemy that owned the high ground. Men were dying, good men, and nobody knew how to stop it. Private First Class Peter Morrison was from Milwaukee, 21 years old, different family than the Morrisons Danny knew back in Wisconsin, but hearing that Milwaukee accent felt like home, made the war feel smaller, more personal, like maybe they were fighting for something more than strategy and territory. They shared a foxhole during night watch on June 12th. The night was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that made you think too much, made you remember why you were there, what you had left behind. Pete could not sleep, neither could Danny, so they talked. Pete showed Danny the photographs first, pulled them from his breast pocket wrapped in wax paper to keep them dry. Sarah Brennan, 20 years old, worked at a munitions factory in Milwaukee, curly blonde hair, smile that somehow came through even in grainy black and white. We met at a USO dance in 41. Pete's voice was soft, careful, like he was handling something fragile. 3 years now. I'm going to marry her when I get home. He pulled out a half-written letter, showed Danny the opening lines. Dearest Sarah, I promise when I get home, I am taking you to Lake Michigan, whole summer doing nothing but fishing and watching the sunset. I am going to propose properly this time, not in a factory parking lot. Danny looked at Pete's face in the moonlight, saw something he recognized, the same expression his father wore talking about Danny's mother. Love mixed with hope, fear mixed with determination, the look of a man who had something worth surviving for. You are from Sheboygan, right? Danny nodded. Born and raised. My uncle has a farm near there. Dairy operation. You ever work silos? Danny smiled despite himself. Since I was 12. Worst job on the farm. Pete laughed, a quiet sound that somehow made the war feel less heavy. My uncle says the same thing. Dark, claustrophobic, 40 feet up with a sledgehammer, hoping the grain does not bury you. Exactly. They talked for an hour about Wisconsin winters that froze your breath, about milking cows at 4 in the morning when it was so cold the milk steamed, about the smell of silage and the sound of barn swallows and the way spring felt after 5 months of snow. About home. Before dawn, Pete asked a question that Danny would remember for the rest of his life. You think we make it through this? Danny looked at him. Thought about the 11 men already dead, about German snipers in church steeples, about how many more would die before Carentan fell. You have Sarah waiting. You will make it. Pete pulled out Sarah's photograph again, studied it like he was memorizing details he might forget. Then he looked at Danny. If something goes wrong, you write her. Tell her I tried to come home. The words hung in the air between them. Heavy, final. The kind of request you only make when you understand how fragile survival is. Danny's throat tightened. You will write her yourself, Pete. Promise me, Danny. I promise. Pete tucked the photograph back in his pocket, patted it, settled against the foxhole wall. They sat in silence until dawn, not talking, just two Wisconsin boys a long way from home, waiting for a war that did not care about promises or photographs, or girls in Milwaukee who deserved better than telegrams. The morning of June 13th, Pete found Danny cleaning his rifle. Asked about long-range shooting. Danny had mentioned groundhogs. Pete wanted to learn. You grew up hunting, you know the basics. Groundhogs at 200 yards are different than Germans at 600. How do you calculate the drop? Danny showed him. Explained holdover, wind compensation, how temperature affected air density, how angles changed trajectory. Pete practiced with an empty rifle, lining up imaginary shots, asking questions, learning. You are a natural. You have the patience for it. Pete grinned. Wisconsin boys know how to wait. We wait for cows to cooperate. We wait for weather to change. We can wait for the right shot. They talked for an hour about tactics, about survival, about what they would do after the war. Pete talked about Sarah, about proposing at Lake Michigan, about building a life that had nothing to do with foxholes and fear. Danny talked less, but he listened, and he thought about how many good men were not going to make it home, how many Sarahs would wait for men who would never return, how many promises would die in French dirt. He did not know that in 90 minutes Pete Morrison would be one of them. At 9:15 in the morning on June 13, 1944, Private First Class Peter Morrison took a bullet through the throat. Danny was 50 yards away when it happened. Saw Pete moving between hedgerows. Saw him stop, point toward German positions, giving directions to his squad. Saw his head snap sideways. Pete grabbed his throat. Blood poured through his fingers, dark, arterial, the kind of bleeding you cannot stop with pressure or bandages or prayer. He fell. Danny ran, dropped his rifle, sprinted across open ground. Machine gun fire kicked up dirt around him, snapped through the air close enough to feel. He did not care, did not think, just ran. He reached Pete in 20 seconds, dragged him behind a hedgerow, applied pressure to the wound even though he could see it was hopeless. The bullet had severed the carotid artery. There was too much blood, too much damage. Pete's eyes were wide, terrified. He tried to speak, could not. Blood filled his mouth, spilled over his lips. Danny held him, kept pressure on the wound, felt Pete's pulse weakening under his hands, felt life leaving, felt the weight of a promise he did not know how to keep. Pete's lips moved. No sound came out, but Danny could read the words. Sarah. Then one more word. Tell her. I will. Danny's voice was breaking. I promise. I will tell her. Pete's hand gripping Danny's sleeve tightened with desperate strength, then relaxed. The grip loosened. The pulse stopped. He died 40 seconds after being shot. Blood staining French soil. Sarah's photograph in his breast pocket. A half-written letter promising Lake Michigan and a proper proposal. A life that would never happen. Danny sat there for 5 minutes, holding Pete's body, watching blood soak into dirt, thinking about promises, about Sarah waiting in Milwaukee, about how he would write a letter explaining that Pete had tried, that he had been brave, that his last word was her name, about how that would never be enough. Later that day, Danny went through Pete's personal effects with the company clerk, found Sarah's photograph, found the unfinished letter, found a small ring box he had not known Pete was carrying. Inside was an engagement ring, simple gold band with a tiny diamond. Pete had been carrying it across France, waiting to get home, waiting to propose properly. The clerk logged everything, said it would be sent to next of kin, to Pete's parents in Milwaukee. They would forward it to Sarah with the telegram. Danny asked for the photograph, against regulations. But the clerk looked the other way. Danny tucked it in his own pocket, next to his heart, a reminder of what he had promised, of why it mattered. Pete Morrison died following doctrine that did not work. 11 Americans had died in 3 days trying to counter German snipers with ground tactics. Danny Sullivan could follow the same doctrine and watch more friends die. Or he could think differently, could use knowledge that came from climbing silos at age 12, could turn farm equipment into tactical advantage, could keep his promise to Sarah by making sure no more Sarahs lost their men. The choice was simple. The execution would be anything but. Corporal Robert Chen died at 11:40 leading his squad across an open field. Single shot, center mass. Chen was Danny's roommate in England. They had played cards every night for 3 months, talked about home, about what they would do when it was over. Chen never saw what hit him, just fell, dead before anyone could reach him. Danny searched for the shooter, could not find the position. The German was professional, disciplined, gone before anyone could respond. Lieutenant William Hayes died on June 15, 3:20 in the afternoon, the officer coordinating sniper teams, killed by a single shot while standing in an open command post. Danny was 50 yards away, saw Hayes's head snap back, traced the angle. Second floor window, farmhouse. He moved for a counter snipe. By the time he reached firing position, the German was gone, already relocated, following doctrine. Shoot and move, professional, effective, deadly. That night, Danny could not sleep. He kept seeing Pete's face, Chen's cards scattered in dirt, Hayes slumped against a hedgerow. 11 men dead in 3 days, all killed by shooters nobody could see, all following doctrine that put them in open ground while Germans owned the high ground. The Americans were stuck, looking up, dying, and Danny was starting to understand why. The next morning, he walked through captured territory at dawn, studied the landscape, Norman bocage country, hedgerows creating natural barriers, small fields, scattered farms, churches in every village, Germans using the steeples, barns with lofts, Germans using those too, water towers, radio masts, every piece of vertical infrastructure, and silos, dozens of them, and tall concrete cylinders 20 to 40 feet high, used for grain storage, most abandoned since D-Day. The French farmers who owned them either dead or evacuated. The Germans had not bothered with them. No tactical value, just farm equipment. Danny stopped at one, climbed the rusted exterior ladder, 32 feet by his estimate. At the top, he looked out. The view was extraordinary. 3 miles of visibility, every hedgerow, every crossroads, every building the Germans were using. He could see their sniper positions, church steeple 2 miles north, barn loft 1 mile east, water tower 1.5 miles northeast. From here, they were all exposed. He dropped inside through the hatch. The cylinder was 15 feet in diameter, empty except for debris, walls 3 feet thick, concrete and steel reinforcement, small ventilation slots every 10 feet up the wall, 6 inches wide, 4 inches tall. Perfect. He could see out. Nobody could see in. Danny climbed down, his mind racing. Every silo in Normandy was a ready-made sniper hide. Elevation, concealment, structural protection. The Germans were using buildings. Buildings were obvious. Silos were invisible. Farmers did not think about them. Soldiers did not either. But Danny had spent half his teenage years inside them. He knew their advantages. He also knew their dangers. That afternoon, he requested a meeting with Captain James O'Connor, explained his idea. O'Connor was skeptical but willing to listen. Before Danny could finish, Major William Bradford entered the tent. Bradford was 50 years old. West Point class of 1916. Artillery officer, a man who had lost 30 men in failed conventional assaults and blamed creative tactics for getting soldiers killed. Captain O'Connor, what is this about Sullivan has a proposal for counter-sniper operations, sir? Bradford looked at Danny. Cold, dismissive. Let me guess. Another farm boy with unconventional ideas. Sir, the silos. Nobody is using them. I want elevated hides. 30 to 40 foot elevation. Perfect concealment. Germans never check agricultural structures. Bradford's expression hardened. Grain silos. You want to shoot from farm equipment? That is not sniper doctrine. Sergeant, that is farmer nonsense. Sir, I grew up working silos. I know their advantages. What you need is to follow established doctrine. Snipers operate from ground hides or building positions, not grain silos. Sir, established doctrine has gotten 11 men killed in 3 days. Bradford stepped closer. And you think you know better. A dairy farmer who shoots groundhogs West Point develops tactics for 90 years. But Sergeant Sullivan from Wisconsin knows better. I know silos, sir. I know the Germans are not looking at them. O'Connor interrupted carefully. Major, we are losing men. If Sullivan believes this could work. One attempt, Captain. Bradford's voice was ice. Your sergeant gets one attempt. If he succeeds, document it. If he fails or gets killed, his reckless actions reflect on your command. Clear, yes, sir. Bradford looked at Danny. You have until tomorrow morning. Find your silo. Set up your position. When you fail, we do this properly. Dismissed. After Bradford left, O'Connor spoke quietly. He lost a brother at Kasserine Pass, unconventional tactics. Makes him cautious. I understand, sir. You do this, you are on your own. No support, no backup. Understood, sir. You shoot an officer, they will hunt you. Danny nodded. Let them look. He walked back to his position. Less than 24 hours to prove that farm knowledge could beat military doctrine. 24 hours to start keeping his promise to Sarah Morrison. 24 hours to show that sometimes the difference between life and death is knowing which ladder to climb. He pulled Pete's photograph from his pocket, looked at Sarah's smile. Thought about Lake Michigan, about proposals that would never happen, about 200 other men who deserved to go home. Daniel Sullivan had 11 hours until darkness. 11 hours to prepare. Then he would climb into a concrete cylinder 3 miles from enemy lines and stay there motionless for as long as it took. He had ammunition, he had position, he had patience learned from spending hours alone in Wisconsin silos breaking up grain, and he had a promise to keep. Sometimes you cannot save everyone, but you can save someone, and that has to be enough. June 16th, afternoon. Danny scouted positions with the right bearing from strong point 7. He needed elevation advantage and a clear line to the beam gap. Most importantly, he needed a silo the Germans had ignored. He found one 2 miles from German lines. Abandoned farm, no movement, no lights. The French family who had worked this land was either dead or evacuated. The silo stood alone against the sky, concrete cylinder 38 feet tall, darker than the landscape around it. Danny climbed up with his rifle to practice. The angle was steep, 42 degrees down, changed everything about holdover calculations. Bullet drop behaved differently at extreme angles. Physics worked the same, but the math was new. He fired test rounds into empty fields, adjusted his scope, learned how the downward trajectory affected point of aim. The ventilation slots were too narrow for comfort. He used 10 snips to widen one. 6 inches became 10 inches, just enough room for his scope and barrel. The metal shrieked as he cut. He stopped every few seconds, listened. The sound carried too far in the quiet countryside. The interior was sweltering. June's sun heated the concrete like an oven. Danny sweated through his uniform in an hour. He would need water, lots of it. He would need food that would not spoil in the heat. He would need a waste solution because once he was in position, he could not move for hours, maybe days. He would need to stay perfectly still. No movement, no noise, no mistakes. One sound and the Germans would find him. One glimpse of movement through that ventilation slot and he was dead. That evening, Danny packed his gear in darkness. Springfield M1903A4 with unertl scope, 200 rounds of M2 armor-piercing ammunition, 4 canteens, 6 D-ration chocolate bars, 1 bucket, 2 wool blankets, 50 feet of rope, 10 snips, small folding shovel, binoculars, notebook with pencil, and Pete Morrison's photograph, against regulations. But he needed it there, a reminder of why 3 inches of ventilation slot mattered, why staying motionless for 11 hours mattered, why this had to work. June 17th, 9:45 at night, Danny moved through Allied lines, told the sentries he was on a long-range patrol. They did not question it. Snipers operated independently, moved alone, came back when the job was done or did not come back at all. He walked northwest, avoided roads, used hedgerows for cover. The moon was a sliver, barely enough light to see. German patrols were active at night. He heard voices twice. Froze in place, barely breathing. They passed within 20 yards. Never saw him. The silo was 3.5 miles from American lines, 2 miles from German positions. Danny approached from the south, moved slowly, checked for mines. The ground was clear, but that meant nothing. One wrong step, and he would be scattered across French farmland in pieces too small to identify. The silo loomed above him, darker than the night sky, silent, waiting. The exterior ladder was covered in rust. Each rung groaned under his weight. Metal flaked off under his hands, left orange stains on his palms. He moved slowly, tested each step before committing his full weight. 38 feet up, a single slip meant death. No safety equipment, no backup, just rusted metal and a long fall onto concrete. At the top, the hatch was stuck. Rust had welded it shut over months of abandonment. He worked it with the shovel handle. Metal on metal, the sound was too loud. Echoed across the empty fields. He stopped, listened. Nothing. Tried again. The hatch gave with a screech that made him wince. He lifted it 6 inches, looked inside. Darkness, complete and total. He could not see the bottom, could not see anything. Just black emptiness that could hide anything. He dropped his pack through, heard it thud below, softer than expected. Maybe debris had cushioned the fall. Maybe the bottom was closer than he thought. He would find out soon enough. Danny climbed in, lowered himself through the hatch, hung from the edge, dropped, fell 6 feet, hit hard. His knees buckled. He rolled, came up in darkness so complete he could not see his own hands. The interior was cooler than outside. Concrete held the day's heat but released it slowly through the night. His eyes adjusted. Moonlight through the ventilation slots created thin bars of silver across the curved walls. Not much, but enough. He set up in the northeast quadrant, 32 feet up from the bottom, 2 ventilation slots available at that height. He widened the upper one with tin snips. The metal shrieked with each cut. He stopped every few snips, listened. His hands cramped. The rebar reinforcement in the concrete would not cut. He worked around it, 20 minutes of cutting. His hands were bleeding by the time he finished. The slot was now 12 inches wide, 8 inches tall. Enough to see through, enough to shoot through, not enough to be visible from the outside unless someone knew exactly where to look. He arranged sandbags as a rifle rest, 4 bags he had carried in his pack, positioned them carefully. The angle was severe, 42 degrees down. He would have to brace differently than any position he had ever trained for. He practiced, lay prone, too awkward. The angle was wrong. Sat up, better. Knelt, best. His knees would hate him by tomorrow. But the position was stable. He could hold it. He could shoot from it. Danny unrolled the blankets, one for padding beneath him, one for warmth later. June in Normandy was mild during the day, but nights got cold at elevation. He positioned the bucket in the corner, farthest from his shooting position. Small dignity. He arranged the D rations, the canteens, the ammunition, everything within arm's reach. He would not stand for 12 hours minimum. At 1:15 in the morning, he settled into position. Scope to eye, swept the landscape. Darkness revealed nothing yet. He would wait for dawn. He had done this before, different context, different purpose, but the same basic skill. Waiting in silos, hours alone with nothing but patience. His father used to say that farm work was 90% waiting. Waiting for cows to cooperate, waiting for weather to change, waiting for crops to grow. You could not rush nature, could not force things to happen faster. You learned patience or you failed. The army taught snipers to wait, but Danny had been learning since he was 12. The risk was calculated. If the Germans found him, he would die. No escape route. The ladder was exposed. They would shoot him on the way down or trap him inside, wait him out, starve him. Either way, he was dead. He had considered this, decided it did not matter. Pete was dead. Chen was dead. Hayes was dead. 11 others were dead. Danny could stop more deaths or he could die trying. The math was simple, even if the morality was not. Court-martial was not a concern. O'Connor had approved the concept. Off the record. But operating this far forward without support violated half a dozen protocols. If Danny was captured, it would reflect badly on the 82nd. O'Connor had deniability. Danny had none. He did not care. Regulations had not saved Pete. By 2 in the morning, his knees ached. He shifted weight, found a better angle. The concrete was cold. The blanket helped, but not enough. He ate half a D ration bar, drank water, checked his scope. The reticle was clear. He had zeroed it at 300 yards. Most of his shots would be farther. He would compensate. Sleep was not possible. Too much adrenaline, too much anger, too much weight sitting on his chest every time he thought about Pete's face, about that last word, Sarah. Danny stared into darkness and thought about groundhogs, how they would freeze when threatened, how he had learned to wait them out. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 2, just sitting, watching, breathing slow, being part of the landscape instead of something foreign moving through it. Patience was the weapon, not the rifle. The rifle was just the tool. Patience was what separated farmers from city boys. You could not rush a harvest, could not force grain to grow faster, could not make cows cooperate on your schedule. You learned to wait, or you failed. At 4:47 in the morning, the sky began to gray. Not sunrise yet, just the first hint that night was ending. Danny watched the landscape emerge from darkness. Hedgerows first, black shapes against slightly less black background. Then buildings, farmhouses, barns, Then roads, pale lines cutting through fields. By 5:30, he could see German positions. Church steeple 2 miles north, barn 1 mile east, farmhouse 800 yards northeast. Exactly where he had mapped them. Exactly where his targets would be. At 6:12, a German soldier emerged from a farmhouse. Danny watched through his scope. Wehrmacht uniform, rifle slung. The soldier walked to a well, drew water, drank, stretched, yawned. Just a kid, maybe 19, maybe 20. Somebody's son doing his job. Danny did not shoot. Enlisted men were not the target. Officers were. Officers made decisions. Officers coordinated defense. Officers kept units functioning. Remove officers and the system collapsed. Kill enough officers and the entire command structure fell apart. That was the theory. Danny was about to test it. At 6:58, a different man emerged. Feldwebel insignia. Sergeant. Danny watched him through the scope. The sergeant carried a map case. Walked with purpose. Entered a different building. Headquarters function. Coordinating something. Still not the primary target. But worth noting, worth remembering. Patterns mattered. Understanding German routines mattered. Knowing where officers would appear mattered. Danny waited. Patience. At 7:19 in the morning, Lieutenant Friedrich Weber stepped out of the church. Danny knew him by reputation. Aggressive, competent, responsible for at least 6 American deaths in the last week. Intelligence had briefed on him. Weber wore his officer's cap, carried binoculars. He walked into the open, scanned American lines, elevated his binoculars, studied something Danny could not see. This was the target. This was why Danny had climbed into a silo, why he had spent 11 hours without food or water, why he was here instead of in a foxhole with his unit. Danny's crosshairs settled on Weber's chest. Range 820 yards. Wind 3 to 5 miles per hour left to right. Temperature cool, morning air dense. Angle 42 degrees down. He adjusted his point of aim. 4 inches right for wind, 2 inches high for drop. Controlled his breathing. In, out, halfway, hold. At the bottom of the exhale, between heartbeats. In that moment of perfect stillness, his finger touched the trigger. Pressed. The Springfield fired. The shot echoed inside the silo like a cannon blast. The concrete walls amplified the sound, threw it back at him. Danny's ears rang, high-pitched whine that blocked out everything else. He did not care, did not need to hear, just needed to see. Through the scope, he watched Weber fold. The German officer grabbed his chest, fell backward. 2 soldiers rushed to him, tried to drag him to cover. Too late. Danny had seen the way Weber fell, had seen enough men die to know what death looked like. The M2 round had punched through Weber's sternum and out his back, probably hit the spine on the way through. Weber was dead before he hit the ground. Danny cycled the bolt, ejected the casing, caught it in his hand. No evidence. He would carry every casing out with him, leave nothing behind. He settled back into position, waited. The Germans would react. Standard doctrine. Locate the shooter, suppress with fire, assault the position. But they did not know where to look. American lines were 900 yards south. Weber had been shot from the east. Different angle entirely. At 7:45, German activity increased. Soldiers moved between buildings. Cautious now. Weber's death had created confusion. Officers emerged, briefed together, retreated inside. They were trying to coordinate a response, trying to understand what had happened, trying to locate a shooter who should not exist. They searched eastern buildings, sent patrols through hedgerows, checked farmhouses, barns, a church, never looked at the silos. Farm equipment was not tactical terrain. That assumption was about to kill 27 more officers. At 8:33, Hauptmann Ernst Richter exited a stone farmhouse. Danny recognized the insignia through his scope. Captain, Wehrmacht, senior enough to matter. Richter carried a radio handset, coordinating with higher command, reporting Weber's death, requesting artillery support or air reconnaissance, trying to solve a problem he did not understand. Danny waited. Richter moved into the open, held the handset to his ear, listening to someone, nodding, giving orders Danny could not hear. Range 1,040 yards. Wind 5 miles per hour quartering. Temperature rising, angle 38 degrees down. Danny adjusted, 6 inches right, 3 inches high. Breathed, fired. The Springfield barked. Richter dropped the handset, clutched his throat, went down hard. Radio chatter would be frantic now. 2 officers down, unknown shooter, unknown position, panic spreading through German ranks like fire through dry grass. 2 kills, 94 minutes. Danny cycled the bolt. The Germans were reacting exactly as predicted. Officers staying inside, sergeants trying to coordinate without proper authority, radio discipline breaking down. The command structure was fracturing. At 9:15, Feldwebel Karl Zimmermann appeared in a third-floor window, machine gun position. Danny had seen Zimmermann before. Aggressive sergeant, effective, responsible for multiple American casualties. Zimmermann leaned forward, pointed toward American lines, gave orders to someone Danny could not see. Range 780 yards. Wind 4 miles per hour left to right. Angle 44 degrees down. Danny adjusted. 3 inches right, 1 inch high. Fired. Zimmerman's head snapped back. The sergeant disappeared from the window. Danny did not wait to confirm. He knew. Had fired enough rounds to know when a shot connected. When the geometry was perfect. When death was certain. 3 kills. 2 hours, 28 minutes. The Germans were now in crisis. Danny could see it in the way soldiers moved. No coordination, no discipline. Officers refusing to show themselves. Sergeants leading from behind walls. Communication breaking down into chaos. They had sent more patrols, searched more buildings, found nothing. The shooter was a ghost, invisible, untouchable, killing from a position that should not exist. At 10:02, a Kubelwagen arrived, German staff car, 3 officers inside. Danny watched them exit through his scope. 1 Oberst, Colonel, Wehrmacht, 2 Hauptmann, captains, senior leadership coming forward to assess the situation. Rare, dangerous, the kind of mistake you only make when panic overrides training. They moved quickly toward a farmhouse. The colonel carried a map case, moving with purpose, authority, the kind of confidence that came from years of command, the kind that made you forget basic precautions. The colonel moved into the open, 20 feet from the farmhouse door, 15 feet, 10 feet. Danny had maybe 5 seconds before the colonel reached cover. Range 950 yards, wind 6 miles per hour right to left, angle 39 degrees down. Danny compensated, 8 inches left, 2 inches high, fired. The colonel staggered, grabbed the doorframe, collapsed. The 2 captains tried to drag him inside. Too late, Danny had seen the blood. Center mass, fatal, a colonel dead in broad daylight. Command structure not just damaged now, severed, 4 kills, 3 hours. The Germans were leaderless at tactical level. Everything Danny had predicted was happening. Officers dead, sergeants overwhelmed, coordination failing. The machine was breaking down 1 officer at a time. But Danny was not done. Throughout the day he waited, watched, learned their patterns. The Germans were adapting, using covered routes, moving in darkness, limiting exposure. But they still had to command. Officers still had to lead. Leadership meant exposure. Brief moments. Danny made those moments count. 1:47 in the afternoon, Oberleutnant Friedrich Kahl directing a mortar team. Range 1,200 yards. Wind 7 miles per hour. Danny compensated. Fired. Kahl fell. The mortar team abandoned their position. Scattered. Leaderless. 3:25. Feldwebel Otto Zimmermann coordinating ammunition resupply. Range 800 yards. Danny fired. Zimmermann dropped. The resupply halted. German units running low on ammunition because the sergeant who knew the system was dead. 5:19. Lieutenant Hans Bader leading an assault element across open ground. Range 680 yards. Danny fired. Bader went down. The assault faltered immediately. Soldiers retreated. Nobody wanted to take command. Nobody wanted to be the next officer killed by a shooter they could not see. 7 kills. 1 day. Danny's knees screamed. His back ached. His eyes burned from 12 hours of scope strain. He drank water, ate another D-ration bar. The bucket smelled. He ignored it, ignored the pain, ignored everything except the targets. The sun was setting. Darkness would bring relief. He would rest tonight, resume tomorrow. The Germans still controlled Carentan. The 82nd still needed support. Danny had ammunition. He had position. He had patience. At 8:34 in the evening, Danny allowed himself to lean back. The concrete wall was cold against his spine. He closed his eyes, listened. Distant artillery, small arms fire. The Americans were pushing. The Germans were retreating. Command dysfunction was visible even from 3 miles away. Officers dead, sergeants leading, coordination failing, everything breaking down because one Wisconsin dairy farmer understood silos better than German engineers understood vulnerability. Danny thought about Pete, about Chen, about Hayes, about the 11 others who died in 3 days. He had avenged them 7 times over. But the math did not balance. Never would. 7 Germans dead did not bring back 1 American. Did not give Sarah her fiancé. Did not give Chen's mother her son. But maybe it prevented more deaths. Maybe tomorrow another American went home because Danny sat in a concrete cylinder and killed officers. Maybe that was enough. It had to be. He pulled Pete's photograph from his pocket, looked at Sarah's smile in the fading light, thought about promises, about Lake Michigan, about proposals that would never happen, about how keeping one promise to a dead friend might save 200 lives. Tomorrow would bring more targets, more opportunities, more kills. The war did not care about exhaustion or morality or the weight of taking human life. The war just continued, and Danny would continue with it, until the job was done or until he was dead. He ate the rest of his D ration, drank water, wrapped himself in the blanket. Sleep came slowly. The concrete was harder than any bed. The darkness was absolute. But Danny had slept in silos before. This was no different. Just darker, just quieter, just more important. June 18th, 4:30 in the morning. Danny woke to his knees screaming, stiff from kneeling for 12 hours. His back protested every movement. He drank water, ate, used the bucket, resumed position by 5:15. The Germans were different today. Movement was minimal. Officers stayed inside buildings. When they appeared, it was briefly. Doorway to vehicle, vehicle to building. Never in the open, never for long. They had learned, but they still had to function. Function meant exposure. 7:23. Feldwebel Zimmerman in a different building than yesterday. Rotating positions, smart, but not smart enough. Zimmerman leaned forward to direct fire. Danny waited, patience. Zimmerman pointed, Danny fired. Zimmerman dropped. 80 kills total. Throughout the day, the pattern continued. Oberfeldwebel Kurt Weber at 9:41. Lieutenant Stefan Richter at 11:18. Hauptmann Ernst Graf at 2:07. Feldwebel Paul Schneider at 4:52. 12 kills. 2 days. By evening, German radio traffic was chaos. Danny could not hear it, but he could see it. Confused movement. Delayed responses. Units operating independently instead of as coordinated force. The command structure was not just damaged, it was severed. On June 19th, Staff Sergeant Michael Grant was scouting German positions from a hedgerow. He watched an officer emerge from a farmhouse. Watched the officer's head snap back. Watched him fall. Grant scanned for the shooter. American lines had no angle. Buildings showed no movement. He was confused. That afternoon, 3 more officers died the same way. Grant counted. 16 German officers in 3 days. All precise shots. All from an unknown position. Someone was hunting them. Someone effective. Grant asked around. Nobody knew. Sullivan was on long-range patrol. That was all anyone said. On June 20th, Grant found Captain O'Connor. Sir, what is happening to the German officers? O'Connor looked at him. What do you mean they are dying? 16 in 3 days. Precision shots. Unknown shooter. O'Connor nodded slowly. Keep that observation to yourself, Sergeant. Who is doing it? Someone who understands farming. Grant did not understand, but he stopped asking. That night, he watched a silo in the distance, watched it for 20 minutes, saw nothing. But the next morning, another German officer died, and Grant noticed the silo was in the correct position for the angle. He climbed a tree, looked at the silo through binoculars, saw nothing, but he understood. 2 days later, Grant approached Danny at the command post. Danny had returned for resupply. 16 days in the field, 23 confirmed kills. Grant asked quietly. The silos. Danny looked at him. What about them? That is where you are shooting from. Danny said nothing. How I grew up in them. Can anyone do it? Anyone who is not claustrophobic. Grant nodded. I grew up on a ranch in Montana. I am not claustrophobic. Then find a silo. Bring water. Bring patience. By June 23rd, Grant was in position 2 miles east of Danny's location. Different silo, different sector. He killed his first officer on June 24th, his second on June 25th. Word spread among snipers. Quiet conversations. No official channels. Sullivan is using silos. 30-foot elevation, perfect concealment. Germans never check them. By June 25th, 4 American snipers were operating from silos across the Cotentin Peninsula. By June 28, 9. By July 2nd, 17. The Germans noticed. Intelligence reports mentioned elevated American snipers. They searched buildings, water towers, church steeples, found nothing, never considered silos, farm equipment, agricultural infrastructure. Tactically irrelevant. That assumption was killing them. On July 6th, Hauptmann Victor Hartmann led a platoon through a contested village. American sniper fire was constant, precise, elevated. Hartmann ordered his men to search buildings. They found nothing. An enlisted man mentioned the silos. Hartmann looked at them. Concrete cylinders 40 feet tall. He shook his head. Nobody would use those. Too exposed. Too trapped. That afternoon, Hartmann was killed by a shot from 800 yards. The shooter was in a silo Hartmann had walked past that morning. The silo he had dismissed as tactically irrelevant. The silo that became his grave. In his effects, they found a letter dated July 5th. Liebste Greta. Americans have learned to use terrain we never considered. They shoot not from buildings we expect, but from farm structures we ignore. They think like farmers, not soldiers. That may be why they are winning. Kiss Klaus for me. Tell him his father thinks of him every day. Victor. Greta and Klaus Hartmann survived the war, moved to Hamburg. Klaus became an engineer. Never knew the American who killed his father was a Wisconsin dairy farmer who understood silos better than German tacticians understood warfare. The technique that Major Bradford had tried to suppress as farmer nonsense was spreading like wildfire through American forces, and every successful shot was another nail in the coffin of doctrine that said snipers belonged on the ground. By mid-July 1944, German officers in Normandy were operating under new protocols. Never appear in open terrain, never elevate above ground level, never stand still. Radio communications became coded. Field commands were whispered instead of shouted. Wehrmacht tactical effectiveness degraded not from American firepower, but from American patience. From farmers who understood elevation and agriculture better than generals understood tactics. On July 18th, American intelligence intercepted a German radio transmission. The translation read, American snipers operating from farm structures, possibly grain storage. Advise extreme caution within 2 kilometers of silos. Recommend immediate tactical review. The intelligence officer who read it was confused. Grain storage. He filed the report. Did not distribute it. The information seemed absurd. Nobody fought wars from grain silos. But American snipers knew better. Word spread through quiet conversations, whispered exchanges in foxholes, crude diagrams sketched in dirt. No official channels, no training memoranda, just knowledge passing from one man to another. Sullivan is using silos, 30-foot elevation, perfect concealment. Germans never check them. The technique spread beyond Normandy. By August, snipers in Italy were using agricultural silos near Rome. By September, Belgium. By October, inside Germany itself. Wherever there was farming, there were silos. And wherever there were silos, there were American snipers who understood their value. Conservative estimates suggested 40 American snipers operating from silos across France by August. By September, 60. Nobody tracked success rates officially. Nobody documented methodology. The technique existed in the gaps between doctrine, passed sniper to sniper like contraband. The numbers told a story the Army would later try to hide. In the 2 weeks before Danny entered his first silo, American sniper effectiveness in the Normandy sector averaged 1.3 confirmed kills per sniper per week. Officer kills were rare, maybe one per month per sniper. Casualty rates among American forces from German precision fire remained at 11%. In the 3 weeks after silo tactics spread, confirmed kills jumped to 4.7 per sniper per week. Officer kills increased to 2.1 per week per sniper. German casualty rates from sniper fire tripled. American casualty rates from German precision fire dropped to 6%, a 45% reduction. By late July, the 82nd Airborne's after-action reports noted significantly reduced German command effectiveness in Normandy sectors. The reports attributed this to aggressive American counter-sniper operations. They did not mention silos. They did not mention Sullivan. They cited improved tactical positioning and persistence. In August, the Army's Ordnance Department sent 2 engineers to investigate. They interviewed snipers, examined positions, climbed silos themselves. Their report concluded grain storage structures provide excellent elevation concealment and structural protection for designated marksmen. Recommend assessment of similar structures in other theaters. The report sat on a desk in Washington for 7 weeks. Nobody prioritized farm infrastructure. The war was mobile now. France was liberated. Germany was next. Silos were yesterday's innovation. The engineers who wrote the report were reassigned. The recommendations were filed away. But the snipers remembered. In October, during the advance through Belgium, Staff Sergeant Michael Grant found a silo outside Aachen, set up inside, killed 3 German officers in 2 days. In November, Corporal James Whitmore used a silo near the Hürtgen Forest, 6 kills in 4 days. In December, during the Battle of the Bulge, 9 American snipers operated from silos across the Ardennes. They killed 41 German officers in 3 weeks. Command dysfunction contributed to the Allied breakthrough. Conservative estimates credit silo tactics with saving 200 American lives between June and December 1944. The technique reduced German command effectiveness by an estimated 30 to 40% in sectors where it was employed. Officer casualty rates among Wehrmacht forces in France increased by 60%. These numbers came from a post-war analysis conducted in 1947 by Army historians. The report was classified. Remained classified until 1982. The official record credited improved sniper training and equipment. No mention of Sullivan, no mention of silos, no mention of farmers who understood agriculture better than tactics. In January 1946, the Army revised its sniper doctrine. New Manual FM 2310 Sniper Training and Employment. Section 7 covered non-traditional elevated positions. It mentioned water towers, radio masts, industrial structures. In a single paragraph on page 43, it referenced agricultural storage facilities as potentially useful in rural environments. No attribution, no history, no acknowledgement of where the technique came from or who developed it. Just doctrine, as if innovation sprouted from nowhere, as if rifles modified themselves, as if genius needed no inventor. The United States Army adopted Daniel Sullivan's innovation, taught it to every sniper division in Europe, saved 200 American lives using his farm knowledge, and wrote his name out of history with the same pen that signed the training manual. The technique existed, the inventor did not. That is how institutions handle inconvenient genius from Wisconsin dairy farmers who never graduated West Point. Danny survived the war. He was in Germany when it ended. May 8, 1945. He had killed 28 German officers across 11 months, never wounded, never captured. He felt nothing about victory, just awareness that he had survived when so many had not. Pete was still dead. Chen was still dead. Hayes was still dead. But 200 other men went home. That was enough. It had to be. He returned to Wisconsin in August 1945, took a bus from New York. His father met him at the station in Sheboygan. They shook hands, did not hug. His father asked if he was ready to work. Danny said yes. They drove back to the farm in silence. The same 80 acres, the same barns, the same silos Danny had climbed into as a boy. Everything looked smaller than he remembered. Or maybe the war had made him bigger, changed his perspective, made farm problems seem manageable after watching men die. He married in 1947, Margaret Walsh. They met at church. She was 24, worked at the county hospital, had seen enough wounded soldiers to know what war did to men. She did not ask about combat. Danny did not volunteer. They built something new together, something that looked forward instead of back. They had three children, Thomas in 1948, Sarah in 1951, Michael in 1954. Danny taught them about farming, about hard work, about patience. He taught them to shoot, took them to his uncle's farm, let them try for groundhogs at 200 yards. He never mentioned why he understood shooting better than most people, never mentioned Strong Point 7 or Pete Morrison or 200 lives saved. When his son Thomas asked at age 15 what Danny had done in the war, Danny was under a tractor changing oil. Sniper. Did my job. Came home. Did you do anything important? Danny slid out from under the tractor, looked at his son, saw a kid who wanted his father to be a hero, who wanted stories about bravery and medals and glory. Everyone did something important. That is why we won. Hand me that wrench. Thomas never asked again. Danny worked the Navy Yard for 32 years, became the best crane operator in Sheboygan County. Co-workers noticed he saw stress points in weight distribution that others missed, could calculate loads in his head faster than engineers with slide rules, like he could see through steel, understanding where structures would fail before they failed. He retired in 1987, age 68, sold the farm to his youngest son, Michael, moved to a smaller house in town, spent his days reading, gardening, playing checkers at the community center with other retired farmers who had their own stories they did not tell. In 1963, a reporter from the Milwaukee Journal contacted him. Someone had mentioned his name in connection with Normandy sniping operations. The reporter wanted an interview, wanted to write a feature about local war heroes. Danny declined, said he had things to do. The reporter pushed, called back 3 times. Danny hung up each time. Eventually, the reporter gave up, found easier stories. Danny went back to his quiet life. In 1978, he attended a reunion of the 82nd Airborne, saw Michael Grant for the first time in 33 years. They talked for 2 hours. Grant thanked him, said the silo technique had saved his life in Belgium. Danny nodded, said he was glad. They never discussed it again. Danny's mother died in 1981. At the funeral, his old trophy was still on the mantle. State Youth Shooting Champion 1937. His daughter Sarah asked if she could keep it. Danny said yes, told her it was from before he knew what shooting meant, before he understood that hitting targets and taking lives were different skills entirely. In 1991, a military historian tracked him down. Dr. Elizabeth Chen wanted to interview him about silo tactics. Danny agreed. They talked for 3 hours in his living room. The historian took notes, asked about motivations, about technique development, about impact. Do you have any regrets? Danny was quiet for a long time. Then I regret the men I could not save. Pete Morrison, Bobby Chen, Lieutenant Hayes, the 11 others who died before I figured it out. If I had thought of silos 2 days earlier, maybe Pete makes it home. Maybe he proposes to Sarah at Lake Michigan. Maybe they have kids, grandkids, a life. What about the Germans you killed? They were soldiers, same as me, doing their so. I do not celebrate their deaths, but I do not regret them either. The math was simple. They die or more Americans die. I chose Americans. The interview ended. Dr. Chen thanked him, said she would publish her findings. Danny nodded, did not ask when or where. The historian left. Danny went back to his quiet life. The interview was published in an obscure military journal. Circulation maybe 300 copies. Danny never saw it. He died in 1998, July 12th, age 79. Heart failure. His 3 children were present, 80 grandchildren. Small funeral, family, and a few community center friends. No military honors. Danny had never applied. He was buried at Sheboygan Cemetery. Simple headstone. Daniel Sullivan, Texas Sergeant U.S. Army, 1919 to 1998. 82nd Airborne. Purple Heart. Nothing about innovation, nothing about silos, nothing about 200 lives. Just another veteran. Quiet. Forgotten. The obituary in the Sheboygan Press ran 140 words. Mentioned his work at the Navy Yard, his family, his love of fishing. One sentence said Daniel served with distinction in World War II, participating in campaigns across France and Germany. Nothing about Strong Point 7, nothing about the technique that changed sniper warfare. Just gray type at the bottom of page 7, forgotten by the next edition. In 2004, Dr. Elizabeth Chen was reviewing casualty records for expanded research. Found an entry for Private First Class Peter Morrison. Killed in action, June 13, 1944. Sheboygan County, Wisconsin. She cross-referenced with Danny Sullivan's interview notes from 1991. Found a brief mention, lost friend Pete Morrison first day. From Milwaukee, had girlfriend Sarah waiting. Promised I would write her if something happened. I kept that promise. Dr. Chen wondered, did Sarah Morrison ever learn about silo tactics, about how Danny avenged Pete's death, about 200 lives saved? She searched public records. Sarah Brennan married 1946. Different man, became Sarah Brennan Weber. Widowed 2002, age 80, living in Milwaukee. Dr. Chen called in March 2004. Mrs. Brennan Weber, I am researching World War II sniper operations. Did you know Private Peter Morrison? Long pause. Pete was my fiancé. He died in France, June 1944. Did you know a soldier named Daniel Sullivan? He served with Pete. They were friends. Shared a foxhole the night before Pete died. Pete showed him your photograph. Talked about proposing at Lake Michigan. Sarah's voice broke. I never knew Pete had friends there. The telegram just said killed in action. His parents forwarded his things. The ring, my photograph, his unfinished letter. There is more, Mrs. Brennan Weber. The night before Pete died, he asked Sullivan to write you if something happened. To tell you he tried to come home. Did he write yes, May 1944? You should have received it. Sarah was quiet. I received a letter from Sergeant Sullivan. I thought it was standard condolence. I did not know they were friends. They talked about Wisconsin, about farms, about going home. Pete's death affected Sullivan deeply. He developed a sniper technique specifically to prevent more deaths like Pete's. The technique saved approximately 200 American lives. 200 lives because of Pete. Because Sullivan promised Pete he would tell you he tried, and he kept that promise by making sure 200 other men made it home to their Sarahs. I never remarried Dr. Chen. I dated, but nobody was Pete. I kept his ring, his photograph, his letter, for 60 years. Would you like to know more about Sergeant Sullivan? Yes. Please, I need to thank him. Dr. Chen paused. He died in 1998, 6 years ago. Heart failure, age 79. Sarah was silent for a long time. Where is he buried? In May 2004, Sarah Brennan Weber traveled to Wisconsin. First time she had left Milwaukee in 5 years. She was 80 years old, needed a cane. But she made the trip. Dr. Chen met her at Sheboygan Cemetery. They walked together to Danny's grave. Simple headstone. Daniel Sullivan, Tech Sergeant, U.S. Army, 1910 to 1998. 82nd Airborne. Purple Heart. Nothing about innovation. Nothing about silos. Nothing about 200 lives. Sarah stood there holding Pete's photograph. 60 years old, edges worn, image fading. But Pete's smile still visible. She thought about the letter Danny had sent in May 44, the letter she had read once and filed away. Standard condolence from a stranger. She wished she had known. Wished she had written back. Wished she had thanked him. She placed a small American flag at the headstone. Whispered words Dr. Chen could not hear. Thank you for keeping your promise to Pete, for making sure other girls did not lose their boys, for using farm knowledge to save lives. I wish I had known. I wish I had told you it mattered. Sarah returned every Memorial Day thereafter, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2024. 20 years of anonymous flags. Nobody knew who placed them. Groundskeepers assumed some random veteran. But it was Sarah, age 100 in 2024, still traveling from Milwaukee every May, still honoring the man who kept a promise to the boy she loved 60 years ago. She never told her family about the ritual, never explained why she insisted on making the trip every year despite her age. It was private, personal, a covenant between her and a man she never met. Every Memorial Day she flew to Wisconsin, placed a flag, said thank you, 20 years, because some debts transcend death, and some heroes deserve witnesses even if they never wanted them. Fort Benning, Georgia, 2024. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez teaches advanced counter-fortification techniques to a class of 24 sniper candidates. He demonstrates agricultural structure utilization on a whiteboard. Same concepts Danny developed 80 years earlier. Same geometry from Wisconsin dairy farms. Same physics that saved 200 lives. A student raises his hand. Sergeant who developed this technique, Rodriguez checks his notes. Developed during Normandy Campaign 1944. Attributed to field innovations by multiple sniper elements. Specific individual unknown. He writes on the board. Silo Tactics, Origin Normandy 1944. Developer unknown. The lesson continues. Rodriguez explains the technique is now standard across NATO forces. Taught to British SAS, Canadian JTF-2, Australian SASR. Estimated 2,000 enemy combatants neutralized using this method since 1944. All because someone in Normandy looked at a grain silo and thought nobody ever looks at farm equipment. None of the students know about Sheboygan County, about a 12-year-old boy climbing into dark silos with a sledgehammer, about groundhogs at 200 yards, about a promise made in a foxhole to a woman named Sarah. They just know the technique works. That is enough. In 2006, the Sullivan family farm was sold to developers. The silos were demolished, the barns torn down. The place where Danny learned to see angles was replaced by a strip mall, parking lot where cows once grazed, chain stores where grain once grew. Darchen visited while researching, talked to an elderly neighbor, 92 years old, had known the Sullivan family. You knew Daniel Sullivan, Danny, sure. Quiet man, good farmer, best shot in the county. Could hit a groundhog at 200 yards when he was 13. What happened after the war came back? Farmed, married Maggie Walsh, raised 3 kids, good life, died 98. Heart gave out. Did he ever mention the war? The neighbor laughed. Danny never. Someone asked once at the VFW. He said he did his part and came home. That was enough. Then he went back to talking about the Packers, modern Wisconsin. 2024. Danny's grandson operates a different farm 30 miles from the original property. Still dairy, still 80 acres, still has grain silos. The grandson climbs into one occasionally, breaking up clogged grain. Same job Danny did at age 12. Same dark interior, same claustrophobic climb. He knows his grandfather was a sniper in World War II, knows he won some shooting award as a kid, does not know about Normandy, about 28 officers, about 200 lives, about innovation that changed warfare. Just knows his grandfather was a quiet man who understood angles better than most people. Sheboygan Cemetery, Memorial Day 2024. Sarah Brennan Weber, age 100, places an American flag at Danny Sullivan's grave. Her great-niece accompanies her, age 25. Finally asking the question the family has wondered about for years. Aunt Sarah, why do we do this every year? Who was Daniel Sullivan? Sarah is quiet for a moment, looking at the headstone, thinking about Pete, about promises, about 200 families who never knew they should say thank you. A man who kept a promise, a man who understood that sometimes the only way to save lives is to climb higher than anyone expects. A man who knew farm equipment better than generals knew warfare. Did you know him? No. But he knew Pete, and that is enough. They stand there in silence, 2 generations honoring a man who never wanted honor, remembering a debt that was never recorded in any ledger. The flag flutters in the wind, red and white and blue against gray marble, anonymous tribute to a forgotten hero. If you are still watching, you understand what made the greatest generation special. It was not just following orders, it was knowing when to break them. When innovation mattered more than protocol, when saving lives required thinking differently. Many of you served, many of your fathers did. You know these moments, when the old ways failed and new ways emerged. Share your stories in the comments. Tell us about the innovations you saw, the men who thought differently, the changes that saved lives. Hit that like button if this story resonates with you. And remember that the greatest heroes are often the ones whose names we never learn. Daniel Sullivan spent his childhood learning to see what others could not. Elevation, patience, the understanding that silos were not just for grain storage. He carried that gift to war, used it to save 200 lives, brought it home to a quiet existence where nobody knew what he had done. That is how innovation actually happens. Not through committees, not through official channels, not through recognition ceremonies, through exhausted sergeants who have watched friends die, who cannot follow doctrine that does not work, who risk everything to attempt something nobody taught them, through dairy farmers who think like tacticians, who see concrete cylinders and calculate salvation, who break every rule and pay the price in silence. The modern army teaches silo tactics to every sniper. The technique exists in doctrine, in training manuals, in the muscle memory of soldiers across 31 countries. But the name of the man who invented it lost to history, like the man himself wanted. Private Peter Morrison never proposed to Sarah at Lake Michigan, but Sarah lived a full life honoring his memory, because Pete tried, and because Daniel Sullivan finished what Pete started. 200 men went home. 200 families did not receive telegrams. 200 lives saved by farm knowledge applied to warfare by a sergeant who just wanted Pete Morrison's girlfriend to know her boy had tried to come home. That is the only legacy Danny Sullivan ever wanted. Not medals, not recognition, not his name in history books, just men going home. Just Sarah's not losing their Petes. Just the quiet knowledge that understanding silos and having the courage to climb them saved 200 people from becoming names on telegrams. Some heroes die loud. Daniel Sullivan died the quietest of all, and 200 families never knew they should say thank you. The world sees straight lines. Daniel Sullivan saw angles. And somewhere right now, a 90-year-old man in Tulsa is alive because a German officer died before he could call artillery on an American position in June 1944. He does not know why he survived. Does not know about silos or deflection angles or a Wisconsin dairy farmer who broke every rule. He just knows he made it home, built a life, had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. That is the only legacy Danny Sullivan ever wanted. Thank you for staying with us through this story. Thank you for remembering these men, and thank you for understanding that the greatest heroes are often the ones whose names we never learn. Their sacrifice matters. Their innovation matters. Their quiet courage matters, even when nobody knows their names.